So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Alex Greenberg. I'm the director of the Science and Technology Office for New Mexico State Economic Development Department. This panel will discuss the opportunities for entrepreneurial growth and leveraging the state's increased revenue. I have with me an esteemed panel, Rob Black, Francine Sommer, and Dale Dekker, all of whom I've been fortunate enough to work with in one capacity or another. I'll let them introduce themselves in a moment, but I wanted to thank Lisa, Kara, Cece, and the entire UNM Rainforest team for putting on such an amazing summit, and really grateful to be a part of it. We'll start with some overview and background from our panelists and begin with Francine.
Thank you very much. Very quick background on myself. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Respect Wellness. We're a wellness company aimed at women 45 and over. Our focus is the routines and practices of women. Our ingredients include herbal extracts that happen to be complemented by CBD. One of the areas we have a particular interest in is the menopause space, and we design proprietary formulations for all of the treatment areas that we're focused on. My prior incarnation has been as a venture capitalist. I was a partner of a fund that was investing in New Mexico called Village Ventures. Before that, I was the partner of a number of funds. Focus was on digital media, big data, and so forth. I'm on the board of New Mexico Angels and have been involved in a number of nonprofits in the state. Thank you.
Rob?
Good afternoon, Lisa. Thank you for having us here today at the Rainforest. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Rob Black. I'm the president and CEO of the New Mexico Chamber of Commerce. We are a statewide chamber. We represent businesses in every county and every industry around the state. We also have a foundation, which is our New Mexico Center for Economic Opportunity, which is partnering with EDD on some projects, as well as Workforce Solutions around CTE engagement around the state. So we're active in a variety of different areas, and happy to be here to talk about kind of how do we make New Mexico more competitive and diversify, and in particular using our entrepreneurial ecosystem as a vehicle to do that.
And Dale?
Great, thanks. And thanks, Lisa, this is great. These are always fun to come to. I think this is, how many have we done of these, Lisa? We stopped for a couple of years, 5? Well, so I was here for the first one when Victor gave his talk, and fortunately we were the architects on this building, and it's great to have everybody here today. So my name's Dale Dekker. I'm an architect and planner. Been an architect for nearly 40 plus years. Our firm is Dekker, Perich, Sabatini. We're located in Albuquerque. We also have offices in Phoenix, Amarillo, and El Paso. We have about 200 employees. We do about $40 million a year of business. It started in 1981 with my dad and myself. We had 2 people. That was the firm. The first conversation I had with my dad about continuing the business was he was ready to retire because he was tired and wanted to go home and work from home. So I said, well, let me see what I can do. Let's see if I can drum up some business, which I did do. And fortunately, we continued to grow and thrive in New Mexico and all the states that we operate in. Something that's relevant to this is I have been very involved in any number of economic development issues, including helping some startups grow and thrive, such as RS21. We're early investors in Electric Playhouse. And we really try to build a culture of innovation and opportunity for people that work for us. If you look at RS21, some of their early technologists, their CTO actually started as an architect and had a hand in developing great products. So we're pleased to be here, and we'll see what we can talk about and help you out today.
Great, thank you. And obviously we're at a unique time in New Mexico, dealing with the convergence of multiple exponential technologies, most of which New Mexico is well positioned to take advantage of, from sustainable and green energy, quantum computing, aerospace, cybersecurity, intelligent manufacturing, and perhaps most importantly, biosciences. The questions will revolve around what are the current needs and challenges in the entrepreneurial ecosystem, and what do we do with having the benefit of our unprecedented budget surplus? So what more can the state be doing to support, and where do we go from here? So we'll start with Francine, but please, Rob, Dale, I'd love your thoughts as well. So question is investment relating to access to capital, which has been a theme of so many panels, that investment in New Mexico continues to be a challenge. What's drawing investors or keeping them at bay?
There are a number of investors who are taking positions in or very early stage companies in New Mexico that are out of state funds. Some have money from the state, but a number of them don't. And I think part of the attraction is that we have some very good universities. There on the creative side, we have a number of terrific, successful startups, and that generates more deal flow. I don't know exactly what the breakdown is in terms of the sectors. I do know that the space sector clearly is attracting out-of-state investors, and I'm not talking about the very big companies. I'm talking about very early stage companies. I know that the same thing goes for sort of the creative space. And Dale, you were talking about, your investment in that space. I think there's a lot of credibility. We also have a lot of interesting bioscience companies, and that has attracted a lot of investors. Venture capitalists are always looking for new places to make investments with high quality deals. And we're now in the last several years beginning to get some of those investors. So I think that's very encouraging.
Thanks, Francine. I think what's really cool about being in New Mexico at this time is we are rich in ideas. We have a richness here, and maybe it exists elsewhere, and maybe we're just in the deal flow, maybe because we were involved in a startup success. But I hear about so many interesting opportunities to invest in. Okay, and I don't think these are investments that you got to have $1 million to put in. I think these are investments where you can offer kind of the guidance that an early startup might have relative to business development, marketing, office space. I mean, we've incubated other companies in our office to let them grow. We've also included opportunities to connect them up with our bookkeeping department so that they can help with some of those early startup problems around just setting up a business, to really let those people grow their ideas. That's really what you want an innovator and entrepreneur to do, is to grow their idea and not spend a whole bunch of their time on G&A or 40% of their time messing around with a very complex regulatory system. So I think there is unbelievable ideas here that come out of the labs. I think they need the courage and the safety net that a private sector investor could provide. And I think that they really thrive on the experience of people like myself, people like Benjamin Gardner in our firm, who's our CEO, to really bring that experience to bear to help them grow a business. I mean, we're not going to put a lot of time into ideas that we don't think there's a market behind, there's an opportunity to grow a business. We're not going to put a lot of time behind somebody's ego project. We're going to put our time into somebody who is willing to understand their limitations and really let them focus on what they do best, and who also want to be, a collaborator, because that's really what it takes to grow a business and to make things happen, is a whole variety of different kinds of people. I probably didn't answer your question, but I think that, in New Mexico, at this particular time, we have amazing opportunities, and those opportunities exist in the labs. How we get some of those ideas out of the labs, they have amazing programs. But I see really the opportunity for the private sector investors, and I'm not talking millions of dollars. I think we're talking time and hundreds of thousands of dollars to really grow amazing companies in our state.
So I think you asked drawing investors and keeping them. and then what keeps them at bay. I think one of the on the positive side, and Alex and I have been actually in conversations over the last several months with a lot of the tech transfer team at Lanel. They want you to come to them and say, how do we solve this problem? And I think that's a unique opportunity where you can go into, 3 different national laboratories in one state, including what we have here at AFRL, and say, I have a problem I need help solving. Now, they're not going to help you market it. They're going to not help you scale it to commercial, but they're going to help you solve the problem. And that's unique. And I think that's a real draw for New Mexico. We have such a high level of PhDs in the state, one of the highest percentages of PhDs anywhere in the country. So that's another, I think, resource and draw. Now, those tend to be in the research and development side, not so much the business side. So I think that's an opportunity that where we have a challenge, is that C-suite talent, and that was mentioned in the previous panel. And one of the things that, you look at White Sands, you look at Spaceport America, these are all assets that are unique to us. But I didn't know this till recently. New Mexico Tech, probably one of the only universities in the country that actually has their own bombing range. Now, who knew, right? But that's a really great asset and for New Mexico. Boeing has tested their jets there and shot frozen turkeys into the jets to see what would happen. It's a way to see what happens with bird strikes. But having that sort of a resource here in New Mexico gives you those opportunities. So I think there's some unique spaces where we have advantages. Challenges, we need more physical space like this. We need to be able to have more, whether it's, and not even just like this, but take it to scale, thinking about bioscience campuses. New York has set up a whole photovoltaic campus focused on lasers and technology, really around that and building that ecosystem. We need more of that sort of opportunities in New Mexico. I talked about the need for kind of talent, so C-suite, technical skills is an area where we lose people. We have a hard time retaining them because we don't have that talent. And then the lack of financial capital has been mentioned. And then I think, again, it's thinking about sector density. And that gets, again, to physical space, but also human capital space. How do we continue to think about those areas where we have competitive strength around space, biosciences, et cetera, and build that network that really that we can leverage?
Great, thank you. And we've been talking a lot about barriers in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. What can we do either as the state or as the ecosystem? What more can we do to help firms already here? And Francine, we'll start with you.
I think that all the companies here, and particularly here, need more capital. So whether it's the very early stage seed companies, we're beginning to see funds that are focusing on those companies, like the New Mexico Vintage Fund, and there are a handful of others. We should have a lot more of those. For companies that have gone through the seed stage and are about to do their first Series A round, and then B and on, we need more capital, experience capital, that can go into those investments. Now, the State Investment Council has a lot of capital right now to deploy. And I don't know what the allocation is between private equity, LBO types of investments or whatever. But I think it's very important that more of these companies have access to local capital. Most companies have to go out of state after they've talked to a handful of the local investors. So more breadth in that sense. And then mentorship and, having programs like this and other programs and what the rainforest does is incredibly important, and creating specialized offshoots where you focus on industries, and maybe we create networks within certain industries that can be funded by the state and that support some of those companies. that may exist. I don't know, but those are a few thoughts. Thank you.
You know, I think we need to look at the film industry as an example of what happens when government primes the pump. And they prime the pump through a tax credit that actually built that industry. And as New Mexicans, I think we put in about $100 million a year as far as the state match to get those companies here. But has anybody ever inventoried the number of companies that started up as a result of the film industry being here? So as we look to the future, and the gentleman from San Juan College talked about the need for a strategic plan. Our state has a strategic economic development plan, and it was prepared and released last year. It was prepared by the Stanford Research Institute, where they identified 9 economic development clusters. And I think that's where we ought to really look. If we prime the pump in each one of those 9, but if you take film out of it and outdoor recreation, and you get down to 6 really STEM-focused, engineering-focused clusters, if we were to prime the pump with those, just like we did with film, just think what kind of ecosystem we could build around each one of those economic development clusters. So I think, you know, the real opportunity here is let government prime the pump, let private sector, venture capital, and the entrepreneurs who are working in those space use that as their customers and to build their business and to start up their companies. And I think we would have amazing results for the future of our state.
I think one of the things that we can do as a state to help is create better regulatory certainty. One of the things that is really challenging for New Mexico is we're ready to change the tax code and the regs every other year. And by doing that, it makes it really hard for people to deploy capital. And I'm going to attack a sacred cow here. The legislature loves to create sunsets for every incentive we create, right? So we're going to create a sunset. Well, that means in 5 years, that benefit or that incentive may go away. So let's think about one we worked on in 2019, which is the directed energy and satellite gross receipts tax exemption. That has been a real driver for investment in satellite and lasers that shoot things here in New Mexico, which has been great. That expires in 2 years. So when companies like Boeing or Raytheon or startups spinning out of the labs want to work in satellite technology, they're unsure where they're going to deploy their capital because, yes, it's a great incentive, but it could go away. That's regulatory uncertainty. We need to start thinking much longer term about how we think about our incentives. It's always good to revisit and make sure they're working, but to set these arbitrary deadlines does not help in the long-term deployment of capital, which builds an ecosystem. And then I think other areas where we can help, Angelo McCourse talked about vote with your dollars. We have to help with customer acquisition for our startups and our entrepreneurs. And often that could be with the state. You know, a first-time contract with the state increases the value capitalization for that startup dramatically. It makes it so much easier for them to go raise additional funds. So where can the state play that intervention role as far as being the first pilot, the first customer? I think those become really important for the ecosystem.
Great, thank you. And speaking of the statewide plan, it's available on the EDD website if anybody wants to read a couple hundred pages. But it speaks to so many of the things that have come up today, building industries around our clusters that we have in the state, some of the great assets that New Mexico has, from having the most PhDs per capita to having 40% above the national average in terms of SBIR projects. There's a ton of innovation, research and development. We need the capital and the managerial expertise to match that. So along those lines, there's going to be a $2.5 billion surplus in the state to make strategic investments in our 9 targeted sectors. How can we leverage this to get more federal funding? And Rob, I'll start with you this time.
I think on more federal funding, I would say let's think about what's coming out of the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. Thank you. Intervention Reduction Act, Inflation Reduction Act, and where those dollars are going. So I think that aligning that, so that gets you to, as well as it gets you to the hydrogen hubs as well. So hydrogen is going to be an opportunity for us. We're making a serious play, and actually Alex is helping lead a lot of that effort from New Mexico's perspective for the 4-state effort around hydrogen. I think, and Dale talked about this. I heard him talk about this at another panel. Not that Dale's since sit on a lot of panels, but occasionally he mentioned this idea around other states aren't waiting to put their money in; they're going early, and I think that's important. If we wait for federal dollars to show up, somebody else is going to get that federal dollar. But if we're investing, we're showing that we're leading on hydrogen on these other efforts. That's when I think the federal dollars follow, because they want to vote with success and to show that you've already got skin in the game. They don't want to wait. So I think go early with those investments, aligned with the federal infrastructure dollars, the Inflation Reduction Act. That's a way to really try to leverage those federal dollars.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if you look at the Build Back Better awards, Oklahoma got 2, one around aerospace, bioscience. El Paso scored a big one around additive and advanced manufacturing, Texas, El Paso. But they were going to do those projects anyway. What the federal government did was they leveraged their dollars to build bigger, better back programs. And I think that when you got $2.5 billion of surplus money, we need to read the tea leaves a little bit. If you look at the CHIPS and Science Act, the IRA, and the Infrastructure Act, that's $1.149 trillion that's going to come into the economy. Those are bills that have been funded and will be delivered. For New Mexico, if we just got our per capita share of those 3 bills, that'd be another $7 billion in our economy. And I think there's also a recognition that our country was very susceptible during the pandemic. We're seeing reshoring, nearshoring, onshoring. I mean, these are huge opportunities for New Mexico for companies to attract those companies back here. So, I'm not the governor, but I do have a plan. I think we need to go big or go home. This is New Mexico's tipping point relative to, are we going to make the investments in the future to diversify our economy away from oil and gas, which supports about 33% of our state's revenues for budgeting purposes. And if we don't do it, there's going to be a heck to pay, and a lot of us won't be in this room because we won't be able to afford to live here. And so I think what we need to do is take about $1.2 billion and divvy it up between our research and development universities, put that into taking good engineering programs and creating great engineering programs, make it a sustainable source. Don't do it a one and done deal, provide it over a period of time. I think we need to invest in STEM education. They're predicting that by 2030, there's going to be 1 million STEM related jobs that cannot be filled currently. Think about that. If we were in business and we heard those kind of metrics, we'd be trying to figure out how to invest in building the workforce of the future. And we can do that. The other things are community colleges, CTE programs. What comes first in economic development? The human capital or the drivers for the jobs? I think it's a little bit of both. If we don't build the infrastructure around that, and again, to me, that's a long-term sustainable investment. And then this whole notion of co-investment funds, really, when you think about it, film and our subsidy there is a co-investment fund. For every dollar that a film company puts in, we're giving them 35 cents back. So a co-investment fund in bioscience, aerospace, sustainable agriculture, intelligent manufacturing, renewable energy. If we did $50 million into each one of those co-investment funds and found co-investment partners that specialized in those economic development clusters, and we put $1 in and they matched us $2, I guarantee you we would do for our state what film has done for building an ecosystem around film that would not have been here unless the state primed the pump. So again, let's not think small. That's such a problem in our state. Let's think small. Let's worry about, are we going to get $1.2 million to, I don't know, fix up that little room over there. No, we need to think big or go home, because this is our opportunity as a state. And that's my story, and I'm sticking with it. And I'm going to say it wherever I can.
And Francine?
I really don't have much to add. I think both of you have highlighted really how to leverage those funds. I just keep on focusing on the fact that we need more private capital, because when you look at other states that have transformed themselves, they've been able to do it with private capital, and there are plenty of very good investors here. We've gotten very sophisticated about what we're doing, and I think we should back more of our local talent, because that's a self-fulfilling prophecy in terms of growing companies. That's my only comment. I think what you said, both of you, about incentivizing, subsidizing, etc., makes perfect sense as well.
Great, thank you. And I think that brings up an important point to realize. I mean, it truly is a generational opportunity between the bipartisan infrastructure law, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the CHIPS and Science Act. It opens up a ton of new programs that the state has the capacity to, and is going after. Patricia Knighton mentioned earlier the National Science Foundation Regional Engines Program. I believe there were 17 concept papers from New Mexico accepted. We're working closely with Colorado, Utah, and Wyoming for the DOE Hydrogen Hub, and getting great support from UNM, NMSU, San Juan College, and all the national laboratories. So it really is a regional and collaborative effort. So I really do think this is a sort of a generational opportunity. We have to do a better job of storytelling. I forget what panel mentioned it earlier, but there's so many great programs and resources in the state. Not always are people well aware of those programs. So we have the State Small Business Credit Initiative coming online, which should add a lot of private capital, because one of the requirements is leveraging that public sector money into private capital 10x. And also programs like the New Mexico Finance Authority Venture Capital Program, which is getting stood up and has the rules finally sort of supported around that. So again, along those lines, how do we utilize this surplus to set goals for the state and use the revenues to support entrepreneurs to come up with solutions? Dale, I'm going to start with you.
Dean? Well, I mean, just do the math. Oil and gas is always going to be some part of our economy, fossil fuels, because it's just in too many other products besides transportation and energy. It's in the Naugahyde on these chairs, it's in the plastics in that TV set. So there will always be some fossil fuels, but let's just say that 70% of their state, of the revenue that they provide to the state, goes away. That leaves about a $3 billion hole in the bucket relative to revenue. So if we're going to do a business plan around these 6 economic development clusters, that's what we need to do. That's our target. There's a transition here. It's not going to happen overnight. So how do we build a business plan that fills the hole in the bucket around these 6 clusters? And that's where I think we have this once in a lifetime generational opportunity to do that, through making some strategic investments and making them sustainable. Just don't think it's a one and done deal. It's going to have to be a sure thing that those resources are going to be there. The universities are going to have to build their R&D programs, knowing that those resources are going to be there. And again, to me, it's about going from good to great and making a commitment to invest in our state's future, both publicly, which I think will drive a lot of private investment here, because the human capital will be here. Another thing just to think about is, could our Rio Grande Valley and our 3 research institutions become what MIT and Stanford was to China and Asia? Could it become that to the Latin Americas? If you look at the Latin Americas population growth in the next 28 years, they're going to grow by 168 million people. If we just got 1/1000% of their undergraduates and master's students, PhD students, and built those kind of relationships with the Latin American countries, it would put kids in our universities that we would have relationships with forever. So I think we need to to think big. I think we have the institutions, the infrastructure to do that. But it's going to take leadership. It's going to take convening. It's going to take commitment. And it's going to take a long-range plan to make it happen. So it's the people in this room, it's the university, it's convenings like this that's going to do it. And I have no doubt that we can. And I say this always, this is about, a rising tide lifts all boats. And this is our moment. This is it. We got to make it happen. And it's going to take the people in this room to make it happen. So
Alex, you asked kind of how do we use this revenues to support entrepreneurs to come up with solutions? And I had an answer. I'm changing it as I think through it. One of the ways is to define the problem, right? So what is the problem? Let's say water. What's the problem? We don't have enough water. We have lots of water actually in New Mexico. It just happens to be brackish or produced water, right? The problem is fixing that. So let's put out some R&D grants to fix big problems for New Mexico. Align those with the labs where we're testing, with our universities who are doing this work, and solve big problems. So we know that water is going to be one of the biggest issues, water and climate resilience, heating planet. These are things that New Mexico, we know right now. So let's invest in those solutions today with some of these dollars that give us the chance to be the leader in those technologies going forward. So I think if we're talking about solving problems using entrepreneurship, set a goal, set resources to go towards that goal, and let the market find those resources. And the other thing I would say is we're doing a great job, I think, in funding access to scientists at the labs. And you can talk more about those specific programs and kind of what those look like, because you know that better than I. But those, again, that they're asked to us for the business community is bring us a problem, we'll help you solve it. Then you got to go sell it. But I think those are the things that we could be doing is if we want to look at thinking about how we find solutions.
Francine?
One of the things that's a challenge here, it covers, you have this also in another question, but it's very relevant to what you just said. You have to attract the entrepreneurs to run those companies. Some are local, some will be out of state. But New Mexico, and I believe this is happening, is being perceived as a place where people want to live, want to work. And there are examples of early stage companies that have been very successful. I think the confluence of having state, federal, and local programs working together is the key to this. But you can't do this without attracting entrepreneurs. And you can only train an entrepreneur up to a point, I believe. I happen to believe that entrepreneurs are born, not made. So there are a lot of people in an early stage company that don't necessarily fall into that category. But when it comes to that original group or individual of founders, you need that sort of vision and drive. Making New Mexico a place that people automatically think, I want to be there. The way they might think about Boulder. And Boulder in the last 20 years has become, quote, Boulder Tech. It wasn't that 15 years ago, 20 years ago at all. I think we can do the same thing here. There's a program that the labs have called the New Mexico SBA program, where the labs will support companies that have particularly technology challenges that they couldn't execute on because they don't have the lab and the technical expertise. That's a very effective program. Things like that are what we need to put more money into and create more of those sorts of programs. That's really leveraging that skill set in labs, which is enormous. And both labs are doing things like that. I think we need to do much more of that.
Perfect, thank you. And that program that Francine and Rob both mentioned is New Mexico Small Business Assistance Program, not the NMSBA, not to be confused with NMBSA. Rob Dale's board, New Mexico Bioscience Center Authority, which is also doing great work. And then the larger version of NMSBC, no, I'm gonna stutter on acronyms. The larger version of the New Mexico Small Business Assistance Program is the Technology Readiness Gross Receipts Initiative, also run through Sandia and Los Alamos, where you can receive up to $150,000 grant to be administered through the labs to get technical assistance on prototype development or development of specifications, and are really incredibly useful programs, especially with the technologies that are so engineering heavy, like some of the ones that we have in New Mexico. And they also serve as a great talent pipeline, getting students involved if they're the NMSBA is administered through UNM or NMSU, and could be a great sort of way to get students involved with active companies and give them a career trajectory, like it did for me when I was in grad school. And again, sort of speaking of human capital, obviously we've been talking a lot about traditional capital that entrepreneurs need, but they also need human capital and customers to be successful. And I think that's what we need to focus on, those sectors leading up to this legislative session. How can the state spend this money effectively to achieve gains here in the human capital and customer acquisition realm? Francine, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think that the universities across the state would welcome more support, financial support to expand their programs. I mean, the value of having students, undergraduate and graduate students, involved in startups in very precise ways where they can really add value, I think is enormous. And I would like to see more of that. And we have some of it, undoubtedly, but we could use a lot more of it. Whatever we can do to support the talent that's here locally, as well as attract out-of-state talent and keep it here. And part of that goes back to what we've been talking about, which is capital. You have to have a great idea, but without capital, it's very hard to make that happen. And you're looking at a lot of individuals who are coming out of universities who will start companies. We don't see that much of those in New Mexico. I think there's an opportunity there to get a lot more people engaged in the entrepreneurial environment.
I'll jump in. I think in this coming session, I'll start back actually the last session. We had a really quietly successful last session. Two bills in particular that we worked on, and you had Representative Dixon here, who was our champion on these two bills. One was HB 7, which was the Opportunity Enterprise Act, and then the other was HB 104, which is the Venture Capital Fund. There's $100 million in those two programs. $75 million towards physical infrastructure, public-private partnerships that the Finance Authority is going to manage, and it will allow for building out a second bioscience center or a other type of regional hub. It can do lateral infrastructure into an area that could then go vertical. You can do loans through that program, 30-year loans, don't have to pay anything for 3 years at 0.01% interest. I mean, that gives you some opportunity to do some really cool stuff. And it can also be done with public-private or all on the public side. The venture capital fund's got $25 million in it, and it's designed to put state capital into startups. We would like to see in the next year, since these programs are now they're in the rulemaking process, we expect the rules to be finalized for the physical capital bill, the Opportunity Enterprise Act, done by February, so the monies can start flowing then. Similar time frame for the venture capital fund. We would like to see an additional $100 million into the venture capital fund, and then take that money, align it with an actively managed, VC managed fund that is based on metrics going forward, milestone fund, that funds in the areas that we have strong alignment with the state and strong alignment with the labs. So that's going to look at things like biotech, energy, uh, aerospace. Thank you, Dale. Cybersecurity. So computing. So those are areas that align with the state strategy, align with the lab strategy. We could put actively managed funds into and really start to grow those sectors. And the other cool thing about the VC fund is it's not just equity investment. It could also do non-capitalized loans into IT companies. So companies that, really just don't have any physical thing to put up as collateral. Uncollateralized loans you could use this vehicle for as well. So again, I think we could really target those sectors with these tools. We've got them already in law. Let's fund them up. And you can park that money because it's recurring, so that money gets paid back to the state. And I think the other thing it does do with this VC, if you have an actively managed VC funds, think about if you're a biotech company and you're a VC biotech, you have very strong relationships with professional service companies, with employers in that sector. So you're going to be able to recruit in the human capital you also need and use professional services companies that you've already used with your other companies to support companies here if we need more C-suite talent, et cetera. So I think those are some of the things that I would like to see us thinking about as we go into the next session.
Yeah, that's great, Rob, and Francine's right. I think that we need as a state to recognize the value of our 3 research universities that we have and really see them as drivers of innovation and prosperity. If we don't fund those so that they can have a sustainable source of funding with this $1.2 billion, a portion of it, to really build up those industries and support those economic development clusters, then we're going to miss a huge opportunity. And this gets back to another thing. Here's something, and I see my university friends over there, and they know this, is that we have to build up our human capital. Our state growth was flat pretty much over the last 9 years, and the largest cohort that grew 37% in population was 65 plus. We lost population through outmigration of millennials. They took their kids. That's the feedstock for our universities. And if we don't do something about this, if we don't figure out a way to become a state that attracts in-migration, and in-migration primarily came here in the past, when you think about it, because of the labs and because of our universities. They had to bring talent in to create and staff those programs. That's what drove our growth. We're going to see tremendous growth at our national labs. We need to support that through STEM programs, through our colleges of education. We need to get on the stick in this state relative to provide an education system that recognizes the value of STEM and puts kids in a position to succeed when they enter as freshmen at the University of New Mexico, not put the University of New Mexico or other institutions in the awkward position of getting them ready to go to college. That's not going to work. That's not going to build a sustainable future economy. So it's an all hands on deck strategy that I think we need to look at. And I think we need to recognize again that we have good programs, but let's make them great. Let's have one of the best aerospace engineering programs in our universities in the United States. Let's have one of the best sustainable ag programs at New Mexico State, or cybersecurity at New Mexico Tech, or intelligent manufacturing at UNM. Let's build the infrastructure for the future in our state with this $1.2 billion. And I would love to think it's all going to be about buildings, but it's not. It's going to be about building human capital to address the challenges of our state. A once in a lifetime opportunity. I just hope we don't blow it. And that's.
And you mentioned earlier being at the inflection point. I mean, we're really at the sort of precipice now. If not us, then who? And if not now, then when? And you also mentioned the aging demographics. I want to give Paula a shout out from New Mexico News, making sure that our aging demographic stays involved in the entrepreneurial ecosystem, which is going to be so critical going forward. And then along those lines, the need for our bioscience cluster to be active so that there's healthcare and caretaking generally available for that population. But sticking with the theme for talent pipeline, how do we build a pipeline of high-tech employees to support high-tech and the deep tech ecosystem? Dale, we'll start with you.
Well, I mean, if you look at those 6 economic development clusters, they all require a STEM educated workforce, and they require engineers. So what are we going to do? Are we going to assume that the status quo is just going to get us there? No, we need to invest. We need to become programs that become magnets for research and development dollars. I mean, if you just go look at the CHIPS and Science Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, there is goobs and gobs of money for STEM education. Our country at the highest level, the federal level, realized we've got a serious problem. We're like number 31 in the world as far as STEM education goes. And we've lost our dominant position in that over the last 25 years. You know who's number 1? China. What does that tell you? It tells me that, boy, we better get on the stick around here and start investing and making those strategic investments that's going to provide the workforce and the human capital to support our state and diversify our economy. And this is the group that can do it. We all need to reach out to our legislators and other people. We need to get actively involved. But more importantly, we need to send a message that, again, we have good programs. Let's make them great. And I think that's going to take resources, dollars, willpower, a long-term commitment. It's not going to happen overnight. And it can't be a one and done mentality. Well, we're just going to throw a bunch of money at it. That's going to fix the problem. That ain't going to work. We all know that. So I think that that's incumbent upon all of us to go do what we can and support at all levels our universities and our education system.
So I'm going to take a little different tack. I think, when we think about building our high-tech work employees, I think part of what we need to do is market the state. We spend $0 promoting or marketing to business to locate here. We spend a lot on tourism. We do a good job with that, but we don't talk about business and workforce recruitment to this state. Dale mentioned the idea we're losing people in our workforce age. And most recent study we did at the chamber, we anticipate losing 3% of our working age population over the next decade. That is not a recipe for success. Texas is looking to grow about 4%, Utah by 6%. Everybody around us is growing except for us. Well, Oklahoma's not. But we need to be bringing in there. And then you think about who should we target? I would argue, if you look at New Mexico, last 2 governors were women. Majority of cabinet secretaries, women. Head of this university, a woman. Majority of judges in New Mexico are women. We have a matriarch here. We need to market that. We need to say, this is the place, if you're a woman entrepreneur, if you're in tech and women, with a woman in tech, and our pay scales are better here in technology with women, large part to the labs. Who else is marketing to that group to say, come and open your business or come and work in New Mexico? We should spend millions of dollars marketing to that sector to grow New Mexico's economy. I think it does a lot of positives for us, and it would be a differentiator for us and something that we could sell. So I would argue we need to market New Mexico as a place to locate and run your business.
Hey, Francine?
Yeah, I agree with your approach about marketing and giving New Mexico the visibility that New Mexico has, for instance, in the film industry. That happened in part because it's traditionally, you have these incentives across the country. The state decided to really focus on that vertical and made those incentives very attractive, and we're building on the beauty of where we live. I think that um, the quality of life in New Mexico compared to the coasts, for instance, is much better. We need to really promote that. We need to do a lot more work about that transition. Dale, you were talking about it when a freshman enters the university. You don't want them to, you don't want to have to prepare them to be at the university or college. You want them to be ready. A lot more has to be done, which is an enormous problem, but and a challenge with the education system. It affects who wants to come here with their family and where they can go to school. It's incredibly important. And we're attracting a lot of young people, but as they start families and as their children grow older, there are some real challenges. And we need to address those challenges because we don't need to just attract people, we need to retain them. It's less hard now to attract. It's still a challenge based on what I see in retaining them. And a lot of it has to do with education. It has to do with all the infrastructure that you're talking about in terms of supporting entrepreneurs. It has been very challenging over the years to spin out technology from the labs to private companies. The universities have been more effective at it than the labs. In part, it's, I believe, the mission of the labs is a corporate mission. It's not an entrepreneurial mission. And how one taps into that, I personally don't see that having been solved. I think if we could solve that, you would deal with the human resource issue, you'd deal with the technology issue, and then you would probably deal with the capital issue, because good deals will attract capital, and we have capital. So I think this issue of education is incredibly important and underlies a lot of other issues.
Perfect, thank you. And we have a little under 3 minutes left. Are there any pressing audience questions, or should I go to the next one? Sure. And for those online, those about the opposition to seemingly the collective agreement of certain barriers and challenges within the entrepreneurial ecosystem. I'll start with Rob or Dale.
You know, I think it's because we don't have a plan that's clearly defined, and are getting hit from 10,000 different directions with 10,000 different ideas. See, like I just threw out an idea today. I mean, everybody in here has an idea probably how we could spend $1.2 billion and make our state better. But if we don't get all on the same page, and really when you think about it, we're all shareholders in this big thing called New Mexico Inc., which is about a $95 billion company. The management teams are all the public sector people that are in this room because they're deploying those dollars. And as Bruce King used to call the legislature, his board of directors. So when we look at it, because they're the appropriators of the funds, if we could get alignment, again, between our universities, our research and development universities, about coming to the legislature with a cohesive strategy and plan around these economic development clusters, how refreshing would that be? Because they're taught to compete with each other for limited resources. So this is a once in a lifetime opportunity, again, where we have the resources that if we had a plan, and we had a strategy, and we're willing to accept the risk, because nothing we do when we start to invest in these things is going to be risk. I mean, there's going to be risk attached to it. So that would be my statement, is that, you know, we need focus and strategy, just like we would in business. We also need the ability to pivot and change and move when things are not working well, which we're not good at in New Mexico. We'd rather not do that because it's too much risk. There might be failure there. So I think it's a mindset that we're going to have to change. But hey, the meteorite is headed at New Mexico, and it's called climate change. Fossil fuels isn't going to provide the resources in 10, 15 years that it does now. And we need to start working at that before the meteorite hits planet Earth or planet New Mexico.
I'll go very quickly. I think, and I'll pivot off from what Dale was talking about. I think it's a bit of a scattershot, and it has been historically. I think we now do have a plan that the state has published, the 20-year diversification strategy. And I'll reinforce this, and you probably don't expect to hear this from the head of the Chamber of Commerce, but the LFC came out with a report in August that said we've got a decade of oil and gas revenues, and then we start dropping. And the state's general fund will no longer ever be back at that level in 10 years. If we do not act with urgency to diversify our economy over the next decade, we will condemn the next 2 generations of New Mexicans to a level of poverty this state has not seen in 100 years. We have to act now. And so that's, to me, the narrative that we have to tell the policymakers to help align these priorities, to really make the investments today so that the next generation is based on prosperity and hope, not on a lack of resources.
And unfortunately, we're over time. I want to echo those sentiments, that we're facing these tremendous opportunities or tremendous challenges, but that also means that we also have tremendous opportunities. I want to close the panel with that. Thank you again to Lisa, Francine, Dale, Rob. I think it was great. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.